Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on the program, People, Politics and Power. Well, political scientists and students of African politics are of the view that democracy is in a state of flux in many countries on the African continent. They contend that after several decades of the adoption and practice of Western-style democracy by almost all the nation-states on the continent, democratic ideals and structural dividends are yet to take a firm root. There is the challenge of the practitioners confusing partisan political interests with the obligations of democracy and the demands of social, economic, and political development. In many instances, national constitutions observed in their breach, while the rulers' predilections are elevated to the status of national agenda. Elections are hardly free and fair, resulting in credibility and acceptability problems for most regimes right from their inception. The consequence most times is that such regimes hardly ever settle into real governance mode and processes, as they spend more time either defending their less than transparent mandates or chasing after all forms of perceived opposition forces. In Nigeria, the first 4-year tenure of each administration is mostly spent espousing propaganda and sloganeering to pave way for a second 4-year term, most of which is spent plotting how to force themselves on the political space in the next dispensation and in fortifying themselves economically with state resources at the expense of genuine development, or what is generally regarded or referred to as dividends of democracy for the masses. Elected public office holders are generally unable to distinguish between when and where politics stops and when and where governance should take the center stage to the benefit of the larger majority of the peoples whom they claim to represent and pretend to serve. As another election cycle is in the horizon, it has become imperative to claw at this issue of when the brakes should or ought to be pulled on politics or politicking, and when the pegs and promises that democracy delivers to people in other climes can and should be translated into tangible and sustainable development deliverables in Nigeria and elsewhere on the African continent. What changes have Western-style democracy really brought to bear on African societies and peoples, and particularly so in Nigeria? Are the practitioners, that is, the politicians, the problem? Do they have sufficient understanding of what democracy means and requires of them? Well, these are some of the questions that we will be trying to seek answers to on the program today. And, of course, I'm joined in the studio for now by two very prominent Nigerians whom we will meet right after this time out. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for joining us. We have joining us in the studio at this point in time Professor Yusufu Zuaka. He is a lecturer at the University of Abuja here in the nation's capital. Thank you, Prof, for finding time to join us.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Austin Aigbe. Austin Aigbe is a senior program officer at the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, also here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, we also expect to join us, hopefully, by Professor Charles Nwekaku, who is a lecturer at the Nasarawa State University in Kefi. We expect him to join us anytime soon. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Right. So, Prof, let's begin this way. There is a lot of argument and contention, particularly amongst political scientists and observers, keen observers of African politics, as to whether or not the Western-style democracy that most countries in Africa have adopted is actually delivering on the concepts and ideals of democracy.
I think to a large extent, the Western-style democracy that we have adopted in most African countries has not actually been delivering any, dividends that you mention of democracy. You see, we're talking about, the system of government itself, that the politicians, and in the case of Nigeria, very pathetic, because just about less than 8% of the people of Nigeria dominate the political space 100%. And we expect that this minority will contribute anything to the development of Nigeria. That's a dream. And unfortunately, for a lot of Africans, we have also keyed into this bandwagon of advocating for Western-style democracy on the African continent. Unfortunately, most of these countries have not succeeded, in even deepening democracy itself, in their countries. Because beyond elections for a lot of countries, you can't identify what the political parties are doing in terms of either building the consciousness of the people or even engaging with the people at the level of the policies that they are executing. For instance, in Nigeria, you take the issue of all these issues that have been bedeviling the country, the issue of maybe the number of states that we should have. We don't have a consensus on that. People are still clamoring for more states. The issue of revenue allocation, people are still clamoring for that. And of course, the issue of state police. And yet, recently the National Assembly had to embark on a jamboree going around the country that they are seeking the views of Nigerians. While these views have been expressed right before independence, up to date, and these views keep being expressed, by Nigerians, rather than focus on how to resolve these, problems. They will not, because they are not representing the people, unfortunately. They may, pretentiously say that, they are representatives. But when you look at the institutions of this representation, substantial part of the Nigerian population is excluded from that institution. For instance, we just have 8% or even less than that dominating 100%, both at the national and state level and local government. While the other sections of the Nigerian society or segment of Nigeria, or the other part of Nigerian society are not represented. For instance, you find in the Ugandan parliament, for instance, even though it's not a good example, but at least they try to practice what they call quota representation, for which about 57 seats are reserved for women, about 10 seats for armed forces. They're in the parliament, the army. Then they reserve 5 seats for students, and 3 seats for labor, and about 5 seats for people with disabilities, just to ensure that there's some form of inclusiveness. At least in their own country, we can say at least they are attempting to ensure that they include the people in the course of making decisions and in the course of setting out programs for their country. In Rwanda, about more than 20-something% are actually women that are in the parliament. But beyond that, if you take, for instance, the Chinese national sessions that they hold once, in a year for about 2 weeks, you find that the politicians and the Chinese Communist Party, with other political parties, about 8 other minority parties, they assume that the registered population of the politicians, about 95 million. And they allotted about 30% of seats at that national session to just the parties. 30%. The remaining 70% go to different segments of the Chinese society. And that's why you can see that they are on the plane, on a developmental plane. And today, they're even making an artificial moon. They've gone beyond all these things we're talking about in terms of electricity. They want to make artificial moon so that their cities will be lit, in the night with light. They don't need to be thinking of buying diesel, buying all sorts of things, because the people are involved in the process of governance. In our own case, the people are substantially excluded. We're just talking about less than 8% who have dominated the political space. And they will want them to develop Nigeria. Then we're not serious, because it is only their own ideas. And you can see they're not willing and they're not ready to do just a few things, even just to ensure that they include quite a number of the segment of populations that are not part of the government. They are not willing to do that. So I don't see us really, we have adopted a system that is not working. and we expect it to deliver development. Well, we can't develop through that kind of format. That's my own belief and my own opinion over some of these matters. Yeah.
So, Austin, is it really a question of the system that we have adopted, or it is a question of the practitioners? Because if the system is working in some other climes, why can we not make it work here?
Oh, thank you very much. I am happy from the trajectory that Prof took it from to try to look at it. So when you look at a system and you're saying that system operates, democracy is not a system. Democracy is that a government setup is chosen by the people. So the system that democracy uses is different. So you could have a system that works elsewhere. Maybe we stay with maybe the US or China, because like I said, Uganda is not a very good example, because we have had someone who has been there right from the 80s and is still there, which means the system there is not working. Or they adopted a system, but it's democracy because the people choose the man. In an election that apparently was free and fair, not free and fair. Now let's come down to the issue of system. The greatest challenge of the African nation is that we have too many strong people, too many strong men, strong women, where the institution that is the system are weak. Whereas elsewhere, I'll just quickly use the next 30 seconds to talk about the US. There was a strong man who was president of the United States who would have undermined the system. It's democracy. We also have democracy in Nigeria. The system captured the president and put the president in the place it should be. Because the system, the institution that gave the democracy strength works. The founders of our own democracy that adopted our own democracy also uses the same system to weaken the same democracy. Democracy is not new to African system. If decisions are going to be taken before 1914, before Nigeria became Nigeria, you usually have a village head who sits down to take decision. That is democracy. You may argue that the chief was not elected, but it was accepted by the people. So democracy, even in the when the indirect rule system came, history taught us that they relied on the system. So they used the system that already worked to then rule the people. That was the system that works. But with the primordial culture being changed to the civic culture, we started having challenge. Those days, if you are selected by the people or elected by the people, or even if you are choosing, whatever name it is, and you are to be making decisions at the chief palace or whatever it were then, and you are found to be guilty, the people will be the one they know the day you were born. They will criticize you. They remember the day your father was born. That was a primordial culture that helped us as a system. But today we now operate a civic culture wherein we need to have a national level cake, so to say, that there's somebody in Abuja and far away somewhere in the Cross River or Adamawa, you elect people that comes to Abuja. When they come to Abuja, you cut them off their people. The greatest challenge we have is that, when you talk about the Chinese just now, you just meet. It's a decision-making level that is inclusive. But here, it is a political decision-making level that ensures that everybody, Prof said 8%, but in our last calculation, we actually looking at the people who enjoy the Nigerian booty are by 11.5% of the total population, including the House of Assembly, of course, not just looking at the National Assembly, House of Assembly, the governors, the chair of local council and the councillors, all put together by 11%. And it's worrisome. It's worrisome. The only way, President Obama said in 2009 in Ghana, that Africa's greatest challenge is that there are too many strong men and very weak institutions. The only way for our democracy, because like I said, democracy, you can call it a system, because Lincoln said it's the government of the people, by the people, for the people. And you will argue that when election is done, that is the definition. But on which system does that democracy strive? It becomes a different narrative. And that system is what is written in black and white in our grand norm, particularly the Constitution. And that is why you look at technicalities and all of that. And the writers of the Constitution, they will say one thing here, down the line of the sections of the Constitution, it contradicts the one they said earlier. That's why we cannot practice chapter 2. Chapter 4.
I'm trying to see how we can link this to the quality of governance in Nigeria and in most African countries. But first, let me ask, is there a possibility, I mean, this being the thinking of a school of thought, that our traditional cultural belief systems, our religious idiosyncrasies seem to be interfering with the civic, what we refer to as the civic culture of the Western style democracy. And that is possibly why we are not making the kind of progress that we ought to be making.
Well, I would differ, because the whole system, all religious bodies, whether it's the Christianity, Islam, or whatever, talks about some level of accountability and governance, holding people accountable. It's there. But the Constitution that now undermine, because the Constitution now recognizes that, for example, let's say in Nigeria, it shall be a secular state, people are allowed to practice all of that. But each religion talked about some level of inclusivity, talked about some level of accountability. When you then use religion as an opium, it becomes a different narrative. Because, I mean, like Max Weber said, that religion is the opium of the poor, that you can use religion to manage people. But there's also the management in terms of using religion to bring the greater good to the greater number of people. So I think, with all due respect, that if we are to operate a civic culture that we talked about, if you silence religion, which of course there are many narratives to that discussion, if you silence religion, you are going to have worse than you have as of this moment. It is the foundation that led to the civic culture. That's why I went back to the primordial culture. That the primordial culture was not founded on, it was founded on brotherhood, on a community level governance and participation. But we left there to say, we have challenged with these, before now we have the Council of Chiefs, we have the local police and all of that. There's no need for that. Let's have a federal mind, so that at the federal, you can easily see it coming down. We have a federating state, and I have not come to that narrative of federating state, even though I argue that we don't have a federating state in this country. Only with a federal state, that you have a federal government, there are state federating with powers to make its own laws and govern its own people. Then can we actually begin to think about democracy being functional with a system that works?
Okay, Prof, what are your thoughts on that? For instance, our communal political systems in the past, do they still have some relevance in modern day democratic political practices?
You see, for me, if you are going to practice inclusiveness, then no group should be left out. Why is it that in the process of trying to get the 1979 Constitution, if you remember then, various groups were appointed to come and participate in that conference, just to represent some interest. Traditional rulers were there, students were there, and that was why intellectuals were there. That was why they now had a minority report. Bola Usman and Shegun Osoba gave a minority report, which was not accepted. But today, most of the issues that were raised in that minority report are still the issues that we're being confronted with today. So, for me, I think if you want to run an inclusive system, no group should be left out, because they are relevant. If you take in the past, we used to have, some functions, being performed by traditional authorities. We didn't have all these issues about insecurity that we are now experiencing. Right from 1976, when they now separated the traditional councils from the local councils, and then assigned the functions of just being ceremonial functions to the traditional councils, they now, all they are supposed to do is to keep our culture and tradition and to participate in ceremonies. That's all. And you now find that they have no role to play, and that is why you're having all these challenges, because in the past, nobody appeared in any village and then he's not reported to the chief. They know. But today, a governor, unfortunately, was saying on television, somebody who has sworn to uphold the Constitution of Nigeria, that anybody, particularly Fulani, can move from anywhere and come into Nigeria and that they are citizens. While we have process of becoming a citizen of Nigeria, either by birth, by registration, or by naturalization. But somebody today, a governor who has sworn to uphold that constitution, out of, just some sentiments, forgot about the Constitution and was not taking something that is unconstitutional. So we have, challenges. You cannot be a citizen of any place if you have not, and that was what the Bala Usman, Minority Report was addressing, the issue that you cannot live in an area for 150 years and yet you are considered a settler. It's not possible. You should be considered an indigene of that place. You have all the rights, because when it comes to paying taxes, your taxes are collected. If it comes to business that you are doing, they gain from you. So why is it that when it comes to representation or elections, then they say you're not from there? You are from where? So these are problems that I think we need to really, address, and we cannot shy away from them. And I think rather than going on this jamboree of talking and talking endlessly, I think if the National Assembly people are serious, they should sit down, get all their colleagues at the state level, and try to amend this constitution, because it's not working. We have seen it very clearly.
There are those who also think that even amending a constitution will not cut it, and that perhaps we need a brand new constitution. Well, let's welcome Professor Charles Nwekako of the Nasarawa State University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome. So our discussion revolves around the linkage between politics, democracy, and governance. Is there a synergy among these three concepts? How much role does politics play in the kind of democratic practices that we have in Nigeria and for most of all other African countries? And what is the quality of governance that relationship produces?
Yeah, thank you so much. The three are intricately related. Before I go into that, Plato, in his Republic, writing on ideal state, he said that an ideal state is a state governed by the philosopher kings. According to him, philosopher kings are the best citizens in the state. Citizens in terms of intelligence, creativity, patriotism, and so forth. He goes further to say that such philosopher kings should not marry, so that women and children should not cause them to steal public funds. He also said that philosopher kings should live in a barrack, so that they should not think of stealing money to build private mansions. Although in his letter books, in the Law and Statesman, he said, well, body no be wood. They can marry, but that notwithstanding, they will still live in the barracks. Now, what are the implications? For him, he also said that a state, when an ideal state is ruled by the best citizens available by the philosopher kings, that every citizen will count, that it will be the duty of the state to develop the talent of every citizen, because every service is needed for the society to move forward. And such people should have the mandate, such philosophers should have the mandate of the people. So if you now relate that to Nigeria, you see, you are talking of politics, democracy. Politics is, as a matter of fact, has been defined as who gets what, when, how, and why. Now, democracy has been defined as the government of the people, by the people, for the people. So any government that is not of the people, other thing being equal, may not represent the interests of the people. Now, if you are talking of good governance, now when people have the opportunity of electing those who govern them, and then if those who govern them know that for them to remain in their position, they have to be accountable, they have to be patriotic, they have to do everything, then they have to work. Their own personal interest should not come first, but the interest of the society. And so you find out that in the case of Nigeria, we are talking of democracy. In Nigeria, people are not allowed to elect their leaders. Leaders are imposed at every level.
So it means that the governments are not of the people.
Yes. And that is why government is not working for the people. Government, look at what is happening in Nigeria. In terms of oil production, Nigeria is sixth. Look at everywhere, nothing is working, because government is not working for the people. Rather, government is working for full privileged people. If you go to iron law for oligarchy, the elites, the Nigerian government is working for a few privileged people, and that is not going well for the people. And so the good governance, so long as the leaders are not accountable to the people, they will not enunciate policies that will improve the lot of the people. And that's why you come to Nigeria, the hospitals are consulting clinics, schools, nothing. Nothing is working because the people in government know that whether they work.
The hospitals were consulting clinics as far back as 1985.
Yes.
Are they still consulting clinics?
They are no longer consulting.
Still going on there?
They are no longer even consulting. They are just there for mere representation. So you find out that because government is no longer representing the interests of the people, now they do whatever they like because they know they must go back whether you vote for them or not, because vote doesn't count. And the National Assembly had just demonstrated that by refusing to accepting electronic voting.
Transmission.
Yes, electronic transmission. So if there's no electronic transmission, it means that people in government still want to rig the election. So it is not going to be government of Nigeria.
It's not just people in government, politicians generally.
Politicians, whether they are in government,
whether they are in opposition or in government, they all want to rig to get to power.
Yes, you have kingmakers, you have those who do not contest, but they determine who is there. If they have the resources, according to Karl Marx, he said that whoever controls the economic resources use that economic resources to control the superstructure, including politics, religion, and every other sector of the economy.
Now, that now brings us to the whole question of a social contract.
Yes.
Between the governors and the governed, yes, the rulers and the ruled. Yes. In Nigeria, it's argued that there's an absence of an effective social contract between these two sets of people, and that is why we possibly do not have what democracy is supposed to deliver to the people. That's why we do not today have good governance, what we call good governance. Yes, the absence of an effective social contract.
It is so because, you know, the contract is supposed to be based on the consent of the people. And like Prof rightly pointed out, when you don't get elected by the people, that means there's no contract. For instance, somebody just writes his result, or he's just imposed on the people, or the courts, like we have seen recently. They are the deciders of elections. Unlike the elections are supposed to be decided at the polling units, not in any court. The moment the courts are coming into this thing, they're just messing themselves up, and very soon nobody will even respect them. You see, so when people know that they can win elections, not relying on the people, because you can buy votes. We see people now buying votes. So what contract do you really have? No contract. So when they get in, there's nothing between them, the two of them. They claim they have already paid, you know, the voters at the point of the election. So they do what they like. So when, you know, it is when the system is transparent, it is very fair and free, and that people have seen, even the parties themselves. If you've been observing, these political parties collect, you know, party nomination forms, fees. After the elections, have they given account? Because these are public institutions, even though they are parties, but it is something that they contest in the public space. They should, you know, because if they cannot hold themselves accountable at the party level, then you know that it's a lost battle when it comes to all these things about transparency, accountability. They will not be accountable to anybody. And that is why we're having all this challenge. And I don't think we're going to get over it soon, because rather than even having the system, you know, to be a little bit better than it was before, you are seeing that they are developing more, you know, resistance to anything that will allow elections to be transparent. They don't want elections to be transparent. They want a situation whereby the card readers will not be used. They want a situation whereby they will just sit down and write, you know, election results. And unless people are punished, you know, for such a misdemeanor, like we have seen, for instance, in Akwa Ibom State, where a professor wrote results, and I think he's serving a prison term now. Once we begin to see that, and if
he has been granted bail.
You see, these are the problems. So he
was supposed to be serving a 36-month sentence.
Yes.
But from prison, he's been granted bail. So he's awaiting an appeal that is yet to file at the Court of Appeal.
So if we're not ready to punish election fraud, then how do we expect that we're going to have good governance? It's not possible. We'll just be dreaming and hoping that there's no contract between the governed and the people. The government and the people.
So what that means, Austin, is that There's a disconnect between politics or politicking and governance structures.
Prof has said politics is who gets what, how, and when. This is a philosophy. We cannot remove politics from governance because politics is an activity of governance. Who gets what? So if the presidential office is free, I want to get in because there are certain rules for that president. So any means that gets me to that position, I will do it. That is a political arm of it. To continue to sit there, you have to play another level of politics by allocating these scarce resources. We're talking about resources that are scarce. We are talking about appointment because the one man in this country, the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, employs the highest number of employees. Special advisor, if he can have special advisor on Facebook, special advisor on social media, on Twitter, he can have 2,000 or 3,000 special advisors, let alone the ministerial positions, let alone the board positions, let alone all the NDIs and all of that. Getting to that position become everything because they say after God, the big G, is government, the small g. So seeing government is like seeing God. You want to do everything to get in, except there's a system that put this kind of people in check. Everyone wants to go in to get anything done. And that is why the members of the National Assembly will do whatever they want to do to remain, because it's the highest paid job even now. Those days when we were growing up, it was the oil companies. Everybody want to get into the oil companies. But today, what's not better? One money from oversight function as a senator can give you all the money that a Chevron person will work in a year or two. Why would I want to go to Chevron? If you see all of them now leaving Chevron, they are going to politics. Leaving Snowbedger, leaving Share, they are going to politics. That is the beehive until we control. And again, people pay for depriving or for maneuvering their way into that system. Until they pay, we are going to perpetually live in that anarchy. Somebody who won on the basis of an electronic means, lost an election, went to court, the court used the smart card reader data and gave him victory. Now he's in the Senate. The same individual voted against technology, knowing well that in Imo, a return officer had alleged that it was on that gunpoint he declared a senator. So if it can happen to this, wow, what a great opportunity. We are all going to use it. They don't want the free, fair, credible process that brings the right people that Prof was talking about. Then begin to be, this man, we voted you. Because the man becomes afraid if it doesn't work for the people. But in this case, we didn't vote him or her, so he doesn't even need to use the Constitution. There's no social contract anyway.
So, Prof, that takes us to the issue of government and governance. And there's a school of thought that has said that in Nigeria particularly, the absence of a responsive government mechanisms at every level, whether local government, state, or federal, is partly responsible for why we are experiencing the level of governance in quote now, yes, that we are having at every governmental level today.
Yes, when Prof was talking, you remember, he said, because there was no contract, the people in government, they do whatever they like. It's because there was no contract that they have refused to put in place the appropriate mechanism. If there had been appropriate contract, they would have put in place, what you are talking of are the structures. The structures did not fall from heaven. People put the structures and made the structures in such a way that they will not work, so that they will continue to have their way. And so the mechanisms we are talking of are institutions that people in government have rendered redundant. The institutions are not working. Okay, for example, we call INEC Independent Electoral Commission. But you said that INEC should get approval from the National Assembly. And what do you know? Before they decide on
And
what
the
to do.
NCC.
And the NCC, can you imagine? INEC, you call it independent. So how independent is INEC? So
If
INEC,
it has to depend on
good,
other
good. So
structures of government to
good.
function.
You see that people in government have restructured and reconfigured the agencies in such a way that they will continue to manipulate and maneuver their ways into power and offices. And this is the problem. And then, except Nigerians decide to say, no, enough is enough, this madness will continue. Because if you are, that is iron law of oligarchy. Because the oligarchs, they benefit from the system. You find out that they always structure a way of perpetuating themselves in office. And when they are too old to be in the office, they get their children and the surrogates to take over. And such people shall never enunciate policies that will radically transform the society. And so long as you have that iron law for legal, that is what is happening in Nigeria. The tendency for people in government to perpetuate themselves in power. And that is what is happening. Except the day Nigerians say enough is enough. And for Nigerians to say that, these primordial factors must, that is another problem, ethnicity, nepotism, religion. Because when you want to say, people will tell you, because it's our tribe band that is there. If you want not to say anything now, the Fulani will say because it's their man that is the president. No. Until Nigeria and the citizens rise up above primordial level, things will continue to do like, we shall continue to work for few people who believe that Nigeria is their personal God-given estate. And they can run it anyhow they want and get free. So madness everywhere. Nigerians should sit up.
All right, we'll go on a short break. When we come back, we will be looking at how to reset politics, the democratic system, and all of that to give the people good governance. Stay with us. Thank you very much for your time. Professor Zwaka, we are just maybe about 18, 19 months away from the next general election in Nigeria. And if you notice, politics is beginning to take center stage. Most of those who are in political offices right now have closed their eyes to governance issues. It's all politics and politicking right now. Now, how much threat does bad governance actually pose as an existential threat? How much of it does it pose to democracy?
You see, we have seen in Mali about how many times now there was a coup. You know,
within a space of months?
Yes, because of the system. You see, all the conditions, you know, that would trigger such changes are present. All. The only thing that is probably absent is the disposition of the military. Their disposition. Because normally they'll be motivated by either the disposition to intervene or the prevailing circumstances that are on ground. The prevailing circumstances on ground clearly shows that these people, they came to rescue us, but we need to rescue them. That's the situation that we're in. Because at the rate they are going, they will ground the country. Don't forget that they claim the APC claim they are coming to, you know, fight insecurity. Now insecurity has transmuted into different dimensions to the extent that now even the kidnappers buy buses that load passengers, and when you do that twice, they give the bus to you, and then they continue with after getting ransom from their victims. So it's taking different dimensions. Then they also talk about fighting corruption. So where are we now in the fight against corruption? They also talked about creating jobs, promoting economic development. Where was the dollar when they took over? Where is it now? So you look at it, all the indices, all indications of failure are clearly there. And they need to really sit down, you know. And for me, the Nigerian politicians, I've been saying this, they shouldn't be looking at themselves as if they are competing against each other. But there's need for some form of democratic cooperation among the political parties. We have one country that we need to build. We cannot be operating as if some are, you know, citizens of this country and some are foreigners. No, all of us are, you know, members of this society. how do we develop our country? I think that should occupy the minds of most of these people. And they should have some elements of patriotism, in them. Because if they are not patriotic, they can't do... Look, the highest paid, legislators I have and the politicians around the world, they are Nigerians. Nigerian politicians, they do nothing at the end of the day. This politics is like a holiday. There's nothing serious about it, really. It's like a holiday. And they're even being paid hazard allowance that they have, go into hardship in the National Assembly. The other day, they had to punch the roof of their building just to create an avenue for renovation. I mean, what sort of primitivity is that? When their quest for money, they are so blinded by it that they will go to any extent. When they say they're going for oversight, it's just a dream. Most of these people in the ministries, agencies of government department, they will tell you the oversight. You will run away because there's no any oversight. All they do is to just collect money from them, and that's the end of the oversight. Nothing. And no report of the Auditor General of the Federation is being implemented. So when you see that, there's no accountability in the government, not that we don't have the structures. Most of the structures are there. Either they are not being funded so that they will not perform, or you find a way of putting weak individuals to head them so that they will not even be able to carry out the mandate of those organizations. So unless we begin to do the right thing, and I think the politicians need to sit down themselves, because all these issues, they have the key to the solution to some of these problems. We should not be waiting that a government will not make promises that when you vote us in, then that's when we're going. No, it's our country. If you have any solution on how to solve these problems now, the government should be open. They have already shown that, either they lack capacity. The capacity is not there. Because if they have the capacity, you have the military, you have the police, you have all these agencies of government. If you take the Kaduna-Abuja road, they say they have been given contract for the reconstruction of the road. Not more than 50 kilometers has been constructed already for about 6 years. Apart from the railway line they constructed from Lagos to Ibadan, which is the only thing that you can say they have started and ended within this regime. I have not seen any really thing that you can point to that they have done. So if you have a lot of issues, they need to sit down as politicians, bridge the gap, because once elections are over, you think of how you all contribute to governing your society. But you don't continue with the politics and they say, okay, now elections are over. How do I now remain in office? Then you continue another new set of politics. Bring in people that are incompetent, put them as heads of, some are even dead. They are being appointed as board members. You can't continue to do things like that and expect that you are going to succeed.
So Austin, Prob says that perhaps the people need to rescue the politicians and not the other way around. How do you think that the people can go about rescuing democracy at this point in time?
That is the only solution. The solution to the debacle we have faced in this country lies in the people. The people's power is much more than the power of the people in power. The truth of the matter, when you look at the work by Professor Chinua Achebe, may God bless his soul, he talked about the trouble with Nigeria. And in that book, it was very emphatic that there's actually nothing wrong with the black man. There's nothing wrong with the leadership capacity of the black man. But however, why is there a challenge with our leadership system? Again, ethnicity and all of the things that pop up. Looking at the works of Plato and trying to zero that in with Marxist and all the Marxist tendency, you will come to a conclusion that anyone that must be in power to do well must be one that doesn't have absolute power. In this country, when you are elected, particularly a president, has absolute power.
Even the governors.
And because again, sometimes the president undermines the governor. So that's why you can deal with the president.
Just as the governors undermine the local government.
Exactly. So when the president come on you go on. So it's just everybody want to exhibit the power that they have, and only the people can show that we are truly the people. And how will that happen? We must all meet these. Right now, the senators are in recess. So they are back home. That is, if they went home. They are back home, I assume, because they have offices at this state level, at their zonal senatorial level, where people are supposed to come in. Supposedly. Everyone needs to engage our senators. That what we need is a credible electoral regime. And how will that happen? Go back to the Senate. In fact, it should be a strong message to the senators. Go back to the Senate. You will win an election if you do this for us. I mean, it's again coming back to a social contract. We will vote you if you do XYZ. And what is this XYZ? Session, that session that is in contention, now we don't have a problem with electronic voting. We need to match that up with electronic transmission. The only way to remove these political actors going to a collation center to change results from the polling unit, we need to nip it now. Collation center is where the re-election takes place. They allow you to, they no longer buy votes. They buy vote to justify the number that you see we have people voted for us. So they go to collation point to, and because the opaque system in that collation point is open to manipulation. So they grab it once you're able to buy those guys who are there, put the policeman or the soldier at the gate. So whoever will oppose you will not go in. If we're able to take care of those, so you don't, except we need the army and the police to go on electronically, to go and withdraw the result and then change it and put it back. That will not happen. We will need an electronic voting. Again, it will reduce costs for Nigeria, election-wise. We need to transmit result. Again, it will arrest and bring about what is the solution. The people that needs to be in power must come from the people that need to put them in power.
Professor Onwekaku, the next logical question is, how do we then energize the people to participate more in governance and to hold their elected representatives to account? How do we energize them?
Well, thank you so much. We, who are we? Now, you see, the people must energize themselves. They are in schools. For us, you a teacher, I'm a teacher, we discuss this. At every forum, you discuss this. But the truth is that Nigerians are enlightened. But I'm sorry to say that most of us are educated illiterates because we allow a number of things to go anyhow. Every Nigerian must begin to ask questions about what is happening today. And if we keep on asking these questions, we can also stand up and say enough is enough. This one is representing me. Why did you vote against electronic transmission? People should be able to ask their representatives, whether as a senator, as House of Rep, ask them questions.
No, but that's when they see them.
They will see them. You see, they will see them. You see, look at what happened during the NSAR exercise. If that thing could happen in Nigeria, I believe that Nigerians will also one day rise up and say, we've had enough. And so, first is that Nigerians should, every Nigerian must be, from wherever you are, resist anything that you know that is a shortcut. That is the starting point. Refuse to cooperate. That is, and then insist that the right thing is done. Insist that the right people go. Because the truth is that in Nigeria today, people who have enough money to purchase, for example now, APCs, their Congress will soon start. And they say it's going to be by affirmation. Can you imagine that? That is giving way to rigging even before the primary. And then how much?
Their constitution provides for that, consensus.
We are saying the same thing because you asked me before about the structure, mechanism. These are structure people deliberately put there to circumvent a number of things. And so what we are saying is that if Nigerians sit up and begin to say that the right thing should be done, that also means that if people, it mustn't be any person that will go in and be voted for. People should insist that the right people are voted in. And people should insist that the cost of politics should be reduced in order to expand the political space. Because today the cost is very exorbitant. So most people cannot contest election, cannot purchase funds, cannot run the primary, cannot prosecute it. So if it continues like this, there will be a problem. Or except people begin now to say, no, we don't want this. Then you begin from every level you are. If you're in the local government, begin to practice it. If you're in your community, begin to practice it. If you're in your church or mosque, let us begin to practice accountability, transparency, and so good governance will come. So it will begin from it is embracing. So it's not a thing somebody will just declare. So the state of mind is important. Nigerians should start thinking positively. Nigerians should start thinking ahead of time. Nigerians should say, look, people shall no longer buy their votes with pittance. Only during election is about to come. You say 18 months. 18 months. That is time people who represent us will come home and begin to buy bags of rice and other things. But all this is why they are in Abuja.
Some are already distributing raw cash.
This should not continue. It is not the rice we want. Because rice, after finishing a bag of rice, hunger will come. Teach me how to fish. Let's have functional educational system. Let's have our institutions start functioning. Let institutions start functioning and let merit come into place. As he rightly pointed that a number of incompetent people are in charge of the economy. And this is why nothing is moving.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I guess that the message is quite clear. There is a clear relationship between politics, the quality of democracy, and the quality of governance that democracy produces for the people. Yes. And for Nigeria and Nigerians, there is a need for us, for our politicians especially, those who are holding political offices at every level, to relate more with their various constituencies and their various persons or people to ensure that, of course, these people have a greater say in what happens in government. Let's, at this point in time, thank Professor Yusufu Zoaka. He's of the University of Abuja for finding time to join us on the program. Thank you so much. Thank you. Austin Aigbe is a Senior Program Officer at the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. Thank you for your time. And Professor Charles Nwekako is of the Nasarawa State University in Kefi. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.